Meanwhile, they were both very happy about the cat. Casey told Lizelle to enjoy the moment and gently touched the cat's paw. Casey was absolutely thrilled, asking how it felt. "It's so soft," she said. "I can't even describe it in words." Lapel told her she was very lucky, admitting that he wished he could experience the same. Casey felt a bit jealous and wondered why Lizelle seemed so affectionate toward the cat. She mused that perhaps Lizelle wanted to keep the cat for herself, maybe even to become its mistress. Lizelle, however, didn't think so because the cat already wore a collar, which meant it had an owner. Still, they were all confused about what to do next. Just then, Chester knocked on the door and was allowed to enter. The gentleman apologized, and Lapel was pleased to see his uncle. Lizelle asked what the gentleman had said, mentioning he would like to take the boy with him. Suddenly, the Duke noticed the cat, and he began to worry that his perfect disguise had been discovered. Chester, looking puzzled, asked what kind of furry creature was sitting in the lady's lap. He was clearly suspicious, and the rumors about him seemed to be true. They needed to show him that the cat was harmless. Lizelle didn't understand what was wrong because the Duke was scaring the cat. She explained that the cat had come into the room through the balcony and had probably gotten lost while wandering around. The Duke seemed confused. How could she have climbed over the balcony when even the trees' crowns were so low? Lizelle shrugged and said that her master lived there, asking Chester if he knew who owned the cat. Chester replied that as far as he knew, no one in the house had a cat. In that case, Lizelle suggested they care for the cat until its owner was found. However, the Duke was adamantly opposed to this. Casey, Lizelle, and Lapel were all confused as to why he was so adamant about not keeping the cat. Chester explained that the butler was allergic to cats, but Casey didn't even know about it. Lizelle insisted that she had no choice but to take the cat home. Chester, visibly angry, said that no one could leave the creature alone with the lady. He forbade it, declaring that no one, especially not a cat, would win Lizelle's heart before him. The lady was perplexed about what to do with the cat, but Chester said he would hand the cat over to the butler to find its owner, even if the butler was allergic. Casey seemed to understand the situation. Chester assured them everything would be fine as long as no one touched the cat. He then apologized, saying he had come for the boy and would return shortly. Casey laughed, finding the whole situation amusing. It had been a long time since something this entertaining had happened right before her eyes. She overheard Chester's thoughts and realized that he genuinely thought Lizelle was cute. Casey couldn't help but ask Lizelle how she felt about her little brother. She was curious about Lizelle's opinion of him and asked her to be honest. Lizelle noted that he was incredibly rich, almost indecently so, but that was a problem she could live with. Casey giggled, fully understanding what was going on. She promised not to tell Lizelle, but warned that Lapel would have to prepare himself for 5 years of ridicule. Lapel noticed the boy's red face and asked if he was feeling sick, but Chester quickly reassured him that it wasn't the case. The heat had simply made his skin flush. Afterward, the boy asked where they were going. The gentleman replied that they were heading to the room with the stars. The boy didn't understand why, but the gentleman explained that a new star had appeared, one he wanted to show him. When Lapel heard about it, he urged the children to hurry. The Duke was surprised to hear that Lapel liked the stars so much. Lapel smiled and replied that, of course he liked them, but he also liked his uncle just as much as those twinkling stars. Chester recalled what Leon had once told him about children. They weren't just fragile and precocious, they had an incredible ability to make people smile simply by being themselves. He wondered if one day he would understand his brother's perspective on this. As they walked, the gentleman heard strange sounds and asked the boy what he was doing. Lapel replied, "I'm sniffing you." The Duke was horrified and asked if he smelled strange. Lapel said he wasn't sure, but that it was very different from Lizelle's scent and it felt vaguely familiar. Chester was confused and couldn't understand what was going on. The boy suddenly seemed overwhelmed by memories and became frightened, screaming in pain. Chester rushed to him, asking what was wrong. The boy, in a panic, said that his head hurt terribly. Ran approached and asked what had happened, and Chester ordered him to call the doctor immediately. The doctor arrived and quickly examined the boy. She confirmed that his body appeared to be in perfect health, but Chester felt uneasy. He suspected something deeper was at play. Ran, uncertain, suggested that the boy's memories might be coming back. The doctor was surprised to hear that the boy had lost his memory in the first place, and Chester confirmed this, asking if the headaches could be connected. The doctor explained that it was possible, especially if there had been no prior symptoms. She mentioned that there were cases where people experienced excruciating pain in their heads when their memories returned. Chester, concerned, asked what they could do to help. The doctor replied that they could only monitor the boy's condition. She could provide a painkiller to ease the pain if it became unbearable, but otherwise they would have to wait. Chester was disturbed by the thought of watching the boy suffer, and decided that he needed to take action. He gave the boy the painkiller, urging him to drink it so he could feel better. Lapel, however, was reluctant, saying the medicine smelled awful. Chester insisted, telling him that if he drank it, they could go see the new star. The boy stopped crying immediately and asked if Lizelle could come with them. Of course, the Duke gave his permission and assured him he would feel better soon. Lapel was brave for enduring the bitter medicine, and the butler, seeing the boy's distress, brought his favourite juice to help wash away the aftertaste. He also called for Lizelle. The boy, feeling tired, said he wanted to sleep, and the gentleman wished him pleasant dreams. Chester, now even more concerned, suggested they leave so the boy could rest properly. Ran congratulated the master for finding the boy and mentioned that the juice the butler had brought contained a potion. Chester was horrified. If the juice contained a potion, it meant that this child was Lizelle's and Leon's son. Lizelle, hearing this, asked if she was really going to leave him after saying goodbye. Casey confirmed it, saying that he wouldn't tell her anything because, after all, they hadn't known each other for long. He added that, in fact, he probably preferred not to see her again at all. Afterwards, they said goodbye. The lady wished her a safe journey, but she behaved strangely afterward. When the Duke approached them, she seemed confused about something. Tia ran to the lady, saying that the young master was ill and that the Duke was calling her immediately. Lizelle, feeling anxious, asked the maid to watch the cat, while she rushed to the boy. The cat, in shock, couldn't understand what was happening. Just recently everything had been fine, but now something important seemed to be unfolding, and so he started running after her. Lizelle burst into the room, screaming. The gentleman noticed she had arrived a little late. The boy had just fallen asleep. The Duke had given him some medicine. The lady was completely confused, unsure of what had happened or why he wasn't well. Chester suggested that it was likely his memory was returning, which was causing the headaches. Lizelle felt a wave of relief, as this meant it wasn't an illness after all. She looked at the gentleman and the boy, sensing that something had definitely changed. She couldn't quite figure out why the Duke had such a serious and gloomy expression. Lizelle asked the gentleman if he was all right. Chester apologized, admitting that he had doubted her all this time, and he was deeply sorry for that. Lizelle, though, thought he might be sick too, as she imagined he had some personal problems. She laughed quietly, thinking he was lying because the Duke would never admit something like that. Maybe he had even hit his head on some cobblestone. She wanted to tell the doctor that there was a patient here, but the Duke turned to Lizelle, asking for her forgiveness. The lady didn't know how to respond. Suddenly, the boy woke up. Lizelle was overjoyed and asked if he was feeling better. Lapel smiled and said that the pain was almost gone. She noticed how quickly he was recovering, and she was relieved to see him doing so well. Lapel then told Lizelle to go to bed too because he wanted to sleep with her. He really wanted her to be near him, so he asked her to lie down. Lizelle suddenly realized that this was the very room the Duke had prepared for his nephew. She knew that Chester wouldn't let Lapel stay there, so she suggested that he go back to his own room and sleep there. Lapel didn't understand why she said that. Lizelle explained that the room belonged to them. The Duke, however, assured her that everything was fine, but Lizelle was still shocked. She couldn't understand why the room had been set up for the boy in the first place. Chester insisted that the boy could stay in the room. He had suffered enough and needed to rest. The Duke said that Lapel could come here at any time. Lizelle, still confused, decided to leave it at that. Lapel then asked her to wait while he lay down on the other side of the bed. He truly wanted to sleep with them. The Duke, caught off guard by the request, was struck by the boy's desire. It was impossible to refuse. So, the three of them lay down together. Soon, Lapel fell asleep, and Lizelle noticed that for the first time he had talked so much before going to sleep. She guessed it was because his uncle was nearby. She asked if they were distracting him from his work and if everything was all right. Chester noted that he had stayed there of his own will, though it was a bit awkward to be in the same bed with her. Lizelle was truly grateful for the care the gentleman had shown the boy. The Duke reassured her that it was no trouble at all, as he was his uncle. He then decided to talk about something else to calm his nerves. As he glanced over at her, he noticed that she had already fallen asleep, and he was delighted to see her so peaceful, even in the midst of everything happening. Suddenly, his hand reached out toward her. The Duke, startled by his own action, quickly stopped himself. He scolded himself for not thinking through his impulses and forbade himself from acting without her permission. He needed to sleep now without any more strange thoughts. The cat, still observing, found everything very confusing. He realized that he needed to continue watching the situation unfold. The butler knocked on the master's door. Ran noticed that his master seemed so happy to see him and was puzzled about what had happened. He asked Chester to explain everything, but the Duke admitted he didn't know where to start. Ran, unsure of how to phrase his questions, had to begin somewhere. He noticed Lizelle standing by the window. Judging by the Duke's reaction, he felt he was probably right in his assumptions. Ran remarked that the Duke had asked for her forgiveness, and it seemed that she had responded normally. However, Ran wasn't sure if Lizelle was interested in Chester as a man. He had been convinced of this the day they had all slept in the same bed. He had been so nervous he couldn't sleep, but Lizelle had fallen asleep peacefully, as though nothing had changed. Afterwards, it didn't even seem like Lizelle attached any significance to the situation. She looked at Lapel as if there was no place in her heart for the Duke. The butler had begun to notice this shift in her behaviour, finding it amazing how a person could change so drastically. The gentleman would give in, but Chester didn't want to admit it. He wasn't some weakling who couldn't even get the lady's attention. The Duke told the butler to stop and asked what he wanted to say. Ran informed him that they had a guest. Chester was surprised, as he had already made appointments for the day. Ran explained that the man had decided to visit unannounced. The visitor was Count Cedric Dorrough, who was waiting for the Duke. Cedric remarked that the performance was excellent, though he regretted that the Duke wasn't there to see it. Ran asked if there was anything else the gentleman needed. Chester replied that everything was fine, and told Ran to go, as he needed to speak with his old friend. Ran was sure the Duke would argue with Cedric's comment, but the Count noted that his father had sent his regards. Thanks to the Duke, their sales volume with the Imperial Palace had increased, and his father was very pleased with the results. Cedric didn't understand why Chester seemed so distracted. The Duke responded curtly, saying that if that was all, Cedric could leave. The Count, surprised by the Duke's cold demeanour, commented on how busy Chester must be, so much so that he couldn't even talk to his friend. When Cedric looked out the window, he saw a woman, and realised it was Lizelle. Frozen, the Duke tensed up and asked Cedric if he knew her. Cedric didn't know her personally, but he had seen her a couple of times before. She was apparently quite popular, but not in a good way. He then asked what she was doing there. The Duke calmly replied that it was none of Cedric's business, but the Count didn't understand why Chester was treating him so harshly. Cedric then asked about the child with Lizelle, wondering if the woman was manipulating the Duke through the boy. Chester, irritated, asked if Cedric was sane. The Count explained that he was just worried for Chester, as he had heard that the woman's family had gone bankrupt because of her. He thought the best course of action would be for her to sell all her property or, even better, marry for money. He suggested this casually, hoping Chester wouldn't take offence. Cedric pointed out that the Duke had both a title and wealth, and that the woman might be trying to get closer to him for those reasons. Chester, furious, demanded Cedric repeat what he had just said. Cedric nonchalantly said that it was always wise to be cautious around someone like her, a fox, who probably only wanted money. The Duke grabbed him and warned that if he ever heard such a thing again, he would not spare him. He made it clear that this woman was not like that. After releasing Cedric, Chester told him to get out of his sight and never come back. The Count, completely bewildered, didn't understand what had gotten into the Duke. He thought Chester was simply in a bad mood and that his words weren't anything serious. He didn't believe the Duke would be angry with him just for mentioning a girl. Chester, seething, asked if Cedric had heard him clearly. He told him to get lost before he broke his neck. Cedric, still not understanding, reminded the Duke that they were both nobles and that he had no right to speak to him like that. He said he would remember this. The butler entered the room and, sensing something was off, asked his master what had happened. Chester, still angry, announced that they were terminating all contracts with the Dorrough family. Ran was surprised and noted that they wouldn't suffer any losses from this decision, but asked why Chester had done it so suddenly. Chester replied that even if they did suffer losses, he would tear them apart. He then ordered Ran to find out how much Lizelle's family owed, and to whom. Even if she didn't choose him, Chester couldn't allow her to marry simply because of financial need. Meanwhile, Lizelle asked Lapel not to move, as the water would spill onto the floor. Lapel smiled and said he would make some bottles for her too, and asked her to look at him. Lizelle was glad to see that he was no longer afraid of the water. Meanwhile, the bubbles burst right on her nose. The girl, grateful for the moment, decided that, in return, she would make him taller. Lizelle added more foam, and the boy looked in the mirror to see that his head had grown huge. Lapel was overjoyed by the change, happy to be so tall, and suggested that she should do it again. However, the girl declined, saying it wasn't necessary and that she would refuse, as she would have to wash up again afterward. Lizelle then asked the boy if they should dry his hair. Lapel replied that they wouldn't, but if she caught him, then yes. He seemed to think it would dry out on its own if he kept running around. Tia wished the lady good night, and Lizelle responded kindly. Then the maid suddenly remembered and mentioned that tomorrow was the big day. Lizelle didn't quite understand what she was referring to, so Tia clarified that it was nothing, just that it was already night, and she... Lizelle didn't fully grasp what it meant, but the boy asked if he could drink some milk. The girl apologized and told him to hurry and drink it before it got cold. As he finished, Lizelle realized that the potion would arrive tomorrow, and soon their paths would begin to diverge. She noticed that the boy sighed happily after drinking his milk, so she asked who had taught him to do that. Lapel replied that Moulds did. Lizelle was surprised to hear that he drank milk too. The boy didn't understand what she meant, but he liked the yellow drink, so now he did it too. Lizelle advised him not to do that in front of others. But Lapel didn't understand why. She explained that he would grow up around nobles who would always be looking for faults, even under his fingernails. She added that people would envy his cool new habits, so he should be careful not to show them off too much. It was now time for bed, but the boy didn't want to sleep. He turned to Lizelle and asked if they could sleep with Uncle like last time. Lizelle felt uneasy about it. She didn't think she could voluntarily sign up for that again, and she even remembered snorting the last time, which embarrassed her. She told him they could do it next time, and Lapel eagerly asked when that next time would be. The girl, unsure, replied, "Probably soon." "The day after tomorrow," Lapel agreed. But Lizelle knew she had to keep her word because she had promised. She truly wanted to apologize because, after she left, she knew this false promise would hurt him. Despite initially finding him because of the reward, in this short time, He had become the most important thing in her life. Therefore, she hugged the boy and quietly cried, genuinely feeling sorry. Ran, deciding to be helpful, asked the master if he wanted to delay the delivery of the potion for a few days, but the master replied that it was unnecessary. He had already promised the lady. Chester knocked on her door and announced he would be entering. Lizelle was surprised and asked if the juice was the potion and if it had any side effects. The Duke assured her it did not, and she could trust him. Lizelle asked the boy to wake up since his uncle had arrived. Ran, noticing that the boy was probably thirsty, brought him some juice. Lapel was thrilled and said he was very thirsty, but suddenly the Duke stopped everything. Lizelle asked what was wrong, thinking he might have remembered something important. Chester said it was automatic, just what was on his mind, and there was no way to drag this out any longer. Lizelle approached him and asked in a whisper if he was absolutely sure that there were no side effects. She wondered if he had lied to her, but he reassured her everything was fine. However, Lizelle did not understand why he suddenly told the boy not to drink the juice. She was shocked, thinking he was lying, and even more surprised that he still didn't trust her. Chester assured her that it wasn't about trust. He just wanted her to stay, even if only for a little while longer. He expressed that he truly wanted her to stay. Suddenly, the boy interrupted them, saying he had already drunk the juice. He remembered his promise not to interrupt the adults and apologized. Lizelle approached him and asked if everything was okay, if he was in pain. Chester repeated that he would be fine. Lizelle understood and asked what would happen next. She expected there might be some effect from the potion, perhaps a magical glow. Chester noted that they now knew for certain that Lapel was his nephew. He had known for a long time, but still felt his heart squeeze at the thought of finally finding him. His brother could now rest in peace. Lizelle was happy that Chester had confirmed everything, and he thanked her for helping him. The lady thought she should hug the boy, but she felt so heartbroken. Lizelle told Lapel to hug his uncle, and the boy eagerly jumped into Chester's arms. Ran, too, thanked the lady sincerely. Lizelle felt there was no need for thanks. She was just happy they had found each other. Ran was surprised by her emotional reaction. Lizelle didn't understand where her tears were coming from. Chester too was in shock, and Lapel asked why she was crying. Lizelle didn't want to cry because she was planning to leave them. She had wanted to make their last moments happy and carefree, but now it seemed impossible. Lapel asked what was wrong, and Lizelle told him it was nothing, just a speck of dust in her eye. The Duke handed her a handkerchief, and Lizelle, grateful, tried her best to stop crying. But the tears wouldn't stop. She turned to the boy and asked him to listen to his uncle from now on. He should eat his carrots and not be afraid to swim. If he was scared to sleep alone, he should ask his uncle to sleep with him. Lapel needed to grow up to be a strong, healthy boy. After saying this, Lizelle hugged him tightly. Lapel said if she left, he would go with her, but she told him this was his home now, and it was better for him to stay here. The boy cried loudly, saying that she had promised to always be with him. Lizelle began to apologize, but she had to go. Lapel insisted, saying he would go with her, and they could live in the same house. Chester watched them both cry, unsure of what to do. Lizelle asked if the Duke could take him away, and Chester ordered the butler to take the boy. Lapel screamed, clinging to her so tightly that he tore her shirt. He begged her not to leave and to take him with her. Lizelle asked when she could receive her reward. The Duke said he would write her a check now. Lizelle apologized, saying she wanted to get home quickly. She asked him to send her luggage home, as she had already decided to leave. She thanked him for his hospitality. The Duke, however, asked her to stop. Chester began to apologize for how he had treated her. Lizelle reassured him that it wasn't necessary, as it was expected. She was just happy the misunderstandings were now behind them. Lapel continued to cry loudly, but Lizelle apologized again, saying it was time for her to go. Chester realized things couldn't end like this, so he asked the butler to look into After the child had run after the lady, he grabbed her hand, asking her to stop and wait. Chester, visibly distressed, asked if she could spare him a moment of her time. He knew that if he insisted she stay, things would end badly, but if he kept her, he would do so at any cost. He suggested they first tend to her wounds before talking. Lizelle, still shaken, had yet to calm down. The Duke asked her to wait while he brought the first aid kit. Overcome with emotion, she cried even more, feeling a deep sense of shame. She didn't understand why she was crying so much and hoped he wouldn't make fun of her. But deep down, she knew there would be no later to laugh about it, as today was their last day together. She would never meet these people again. And this was the room where she had asked the Duke for a favor, a situation that would never happen again. Despite wanting to cry again, she forced herself to calm down. The Duke apologized for being a little late and handed her some water. Lizelle realized she should be happy. After all, once she received her reward, she could pay off the family's debts. It was a great day, so she tried to smile, though it was difficult. The Duke noticed that she was still feeling unwell and thought it might be best to leave her alone for a while. But Lizelle reassured him, saying everything was fine. He asked her to show him where she was hurt. Lizelle told him she could treat the wound herself, but her sleeve was in the way, so she decided to rip it off. The Duke, aware that he probably shouldn't be watching, tried to calm himself. Now was not the time to get lost in thoughts. Lizelle had finished treating herself, and then, with a deep breath, asked what he wanted to talk to her about. Chester was troubled, knowing he had been holding her up for no reason all this time. He couldn't come up with a good excuse quickly. If Edric had been there, he could have thought of something ridiculous, but as Chester sat with the situation, he knew that letting her go without saying anything would make his fears come true. He would have to detain her, even though he didn't want to lie. But at this moment, he had no other choice. Lizelle, confused by his hesitation, asked again what was going on. Chester, gathering his courage, finally proposed marriage. Lizelle, stunned, couldn't understand why he was suddenly talking about this. She wondered if he was ill or drunk. Chester calmly reassured her that he was of sound mind and memory. Lizelle was baffled that someone who clearly had some emotional struggles would bring up such a thing. Whatever the reason, she knew she had to refuse. Chester was shocked, asking if she truly disliked the idea of marrying him so much. Lizelle confirmed that she couldn't marry him because they weren't in love. He asked her to marry him for the sake of the boy, as Lapel needed her and wouldn't manage without her. Chester expressed concern for the boy's well-being, but Lizelle didn't understand why he thought she was the only one who could help. Chester almost confessed his feelings right then and there, but when Lizelle apologized for being a little cold and asked him to repeat himself, he hesitated. Lizelle asked if this proposal meant they would have a marriage contract for the sake of the boy. She understood his reasons, but still felt forced to refuse. She had her own life and desires. She didn't want to marry without love, so she told him that if that was all he had to offer, she would be leaving. Chester tried to stop her, urging her to think carefully, but she responded that, no matter how he looked at it, it still meant marriage. The Duke, desperate, asked her to stop, and then shouted, proposing a 1-year contract marriage with an increased reward, 100 times what she had been promised. But before he could finish, Lizelle turned to him and